Well, Dick, thank you so much for joining me. I've been really excited about this conversation and also been an admirer of not only you, but your work from afar. So I really appreciate the time, taking the time to have a chat.
Well, it's great to be with you, Aaron, and thanks for the invitation.
No worries at all. So, look, I think it would be remiss of me not to start at the obvious place, and you've probably been asked this question a million times before, but I'm really keen to get your kind of insights on this. So, how did the concept of MEDDIC first come about? Talk us a little bit through the history of MEDDIC in general.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good. So, yeah, I'll maybe back up to kind of where I was in my career at the time. I started out as my first job after I graduated from college. I actually worked as a design engineer for a couple of years, and then ended up my first sales job was actually with Xerox Corporation, Xerox Engineering Systems, which was sort of the jumping off point for me to get to a company called Parametric Technology Corporation, a really well-known company that was very, very successful in the 90s. It sort of reinvented itself since then, has had a lot of success since then. But when I got to PTC, well, let me back up a little bit. Xerox, great company, great training. And when I was at Xerox, I was introduced to a methodology called spin selling. Neil Rackham, great book, great concept, great fundamentals in terms of needs assessment and engaging customers in meaningful discovery and exploring the implications of the problems to really understand the value of the solution. Really good fundamentals there. And so that really stuck with me. And when I got to PTC, PTC had great sales leadership there. There was a guy named Dick Harrison who was the president of the company, and he was a former sales rep from Prime Computer and a great leader in his own right. And then, working for Dick was John McMahon, very, very well known, 5-time CRO. He's now on the board of directors of Snowflake. He recently wrote a book called The Qualified Sales Leader, which I highly recommend. Really excellent principles there. And the thing about, I think, Dick and John was that they built one of the great sales cultures in the history of technology sales. PTC, there's probably 50 CROs that have emanated from the PTC sales organization for the 90s, guys that went on to become CRO at other technology companies. There's probably 50 of them at great companies. And John's leadership, there were always very strong, ideas around the importance of champions, around process, around, negotiating a value-based process and influencing decision criteria. So it was interesting because all of those pieces were kind of there. They were just sort of floating around, and different managers had different kind of priorities. And so, I think maybe if I could take credit for anything, I sort of, was maybe the packaging of it, right? And the collecting of sort of what were really best practices taking place in and around PTC at the time. So my story at PTC, I started as a rep, traveling around Eastern Pennsylvania, selling to manufacturers, aerospace companies, sheet metal fabricators, selling Pro Engineer, which was a design through manufacturing process. Really awesome. Loved that. Walking the shop floor, seeing steel being cut, seeing products being assembled, and really looking for ways to improve those processes. And so Pro Engineer provided an integrated solution that really improved processes, which is almost analogous to what I'm doing today at Celonis. While there, I was invited to join the sales development program by a woman named Ann Gary. Ann worked for John. She was really chartered with really developing the sales organization and really helping the sales organization to scale, really driving retention of reps, helping them to onboard more quickly. And John at the time, John and Ann had this vision of sort of, they called it 5 touches. And they wanted to be able to basically touch reps 5 times during the first year. There was a new hire. Then there was a boot camp. Then they brought me in to develop what was called the intermediate sales training class. After they had been in the field, they'd gotten knocked around a bit. They had maybe a couple of opportunities to work. I was developing this new intermediate course. then another boot camp, and then the final touch was an advanced selling class run by Anne, which was based on a book called Power-Based Selling. I actually have my copy right here. Power-Based Selling: Secrets of an Ivy League Street Fighter by Holden. And that book, talks a lot about the foxes and, strategic selling. So, that was sort of the framework. And so as I came into this role, we developed the curriculum, and we developed an exercise called Why Do We Win? Why Do We Lose? And Why Do Deals Slip? And it's funny because I still do this exercise today with people. Why do we win? And it's almost like, okay, well, isn't just why do we lose the opposite of why do we win? But the reality is that when you ask the question conversely, sometimes you come up with some different answers, right? And so it's, why do we win? Why do we lose? And why do deals slip? And you can come up with a laundry list of, all of the things that, go right and go wrong. And so when you do that, and so we used to do this exercise during this intermediate class. And after we did the exercise, we said, well, why don't we bucket the items? Let's sort of start to put these things in buckets. And after we did the exercise a couple of times, we're like, well, we keep coming up with the same 6 things, right? And so that was MEDDIC. And so I after doing this thing a couple of times, I went to John and I said, hey, John, I said, I don't even really know what this is, but we keep coming up with these 6 things. And it's like, this looks kind of like the formula for success. It's like, if you do these things, if you focus on addressing, metrics, identifying a quantifiable impact, developing a quantifiable impact of your solution, economic buyer, aligning with the strategic priorities of the business, decision criteria is how the buying group is going to compare their alternative solutions. The decision process is going to be the sequence of events that we're going to navigate through. We have to negotiate a sequence of events to navigate through a process that ultimately leads to a decision. The identification of pain, the identification and implication of pain is the reason why they're going to act now. And then finally, champions. They're the people or person or people within the organization that actually want you to win. They're the people that have a stake in the decision. And so we went through this process and we said, well, look, these are the 6 things that just, really seem to be the key to our success. And so John said, that looks great. Let's run with it. And so we began to build it into our curriculum. We began to make it even part of, a way for managers to evaluate their reps. It's like, okay, I've got a rep here that's doing a great job at developing champions, but they're not doing a great job at influencing the decision criteria, right? And so it even became a framework for, sort of develop from a developmental standpoint. And since then, obviously, people have used it in a lot of different ways, even post-sale. So that was kind of the birth of it. And so, when we were at that time, and this is 1996, I worked with a guy named Jack Napoli, and Jack is rightly known as kind of the godfather, because I don't think there's anybody that's done more to sort of help proliferate the awareness and the adoption of it. Jack got into consulting post PTC, and this was around 2000 when a lot of the sales leaders at PTC were now leaving, and were going to lead sales organizations of other companies. And this was venture capital backed, high growth, high velocity, innovative. This is when SaaS was really starting to take off, and you had I went to a company. I got into the hosting and application management business. I continued to be in sales and sales leadership roles, but that was a time when a lot of those leaders went, and because we had done such a good job of deploying MEDDIC and operationalizing MEDDIC at PTC, they took it with them. And the other thing is that it stuck. It really stuck with them because it was so simple. It's so simple, and it's the kind of thing that a sales rep could sort of look at the do a quick kind of evaluation of the current position, develop a little bit of a game plan going into a meeting, and then quickly use it as a way to evaluate whether or not we were successful, if we achieved our objectives in that meeting. So, the simplicity of it, I think the practicality of it, and I think ultimately, the fact that it really did help to drive great results at PTC, right? When at the time that I was there, It helped to reduce turnover. It helped to accelerate rep onboarding. And during that time, the company grew from 300 million ASR to $1 billion. They became one of the first pure play software companies to reach $1 billion in annual sales. So, good track record. And obviously, a lot of companies have achieved a lot of success with it since then. But anyway, that's a little bit of the backstory.
And so I find it really interesting because, like, when you and I've got my copy of, I've always had this on my desk, my copy of Spin Selling as well, right? But this is a really good example of exactly what you've just said, which is actually what a lot of the big kind of tectonic shifts in selling are people labeling things that people are already doing, organizing the information in a way that actually is beneficial, effective, and efficient, and then obviously it becoming usable and obviously valuable to the client or the prospect as well. But were you surprised by the fact that now that you've kind of inadvertently built a multi-million, probably $1 billion business of the people who consult around MEDDIC, who sell MEDDIC frameworks, who talk about MEDDIC, and how much businesses pay for people to come in and even train them how to do MEDDIC? Were you surprised how well adopted it was as it bled out of PTC?
Absolutely. Right. I mean, I had no idea. And honestly, I'll tell you a funny story. I left PTC at around 2000, and I just basically pursued, other kind of my own personal sales career, and continued to use it myself. I think when I got to Choreo, I was working with a guy named Rob Chapdelaine, who was a former PTC guy, and when I got to Digby, former PTC people. So I had gotten to these other places because of my own personal network where, they had already actually deployed it when I got there. It was the funny story. I've actually had people say, "Hey, how many MEDDIC implementations have you done?" And the answer is one. Right? I did the first one. I did the first one at PTC, but honestly, since then, every company that I've joined, it's actually already been there. So even here at Choreo, it was here, it was in the playbook. Now I've done a lot to sort of make it more robust and operationalize it. But it in fact was already here. So, after, it was actually a few years after I had left PTC, and I was with IBM. I ended up at IBM by way of acquisition. Choreo, hosting and application management services, became IBM Applications on Demand. And so I was actually interviewing within IBM, and I met one of the sales leaders for one of the software groups. And he told me that, he said, "Hey, we've just acquired this company called Essential Software, and they have this great sales leader, and he brought this qualification methodology called MEDDIC. Have you ever heard of it?" And here we are, we're like, 5 or 6 years after I left PTC, and somebody's asking me if I've ever heard of MEDDIC. I just almost fell out of my chair. And the sales leader was a guy that I actually worked for at PTC. So it all of a sudden it's kind of like, all right, this is becoming a very small world. But so that was sort of the moment when I left the interview, and I called Jack Napoli, and I said, "Hey, Jack," I said, "you're never going to believe what just happened." He's like, "Yeah," he's like, "I've been meaning to tell you, I've been, doing a lot of consulting work now, and, Essential was one of my clients, and now, we're actually, I'm having a great time, helping all these companies adopt MEDDIC." So I was like, "Gee, maybe I should come do what you're doing."
Particularly being the creator of it, right? You think you're probably the most qualified person to do precisely that.
Well, it's funny you say that. And certainly I've thought many times about venturing out, but honestly, I really enjoy, what I'm doing. I sort of feel like I'm still in the game, right? And I'm very, very excited about, the things that we were able to accomplish at Sprinkler, successful IPO there, and Choreo is going to be, Celonis is going to be, our most recent valuation at our last round of funding is $13 billion. And so this is really the most exciting technology that I've ever been associated with. Massive, massive addressable market. And so there are very, very big things ahead for Celonis, and the value that they're going to bring to companies in terms of driving business process improvement, to help them directly impact their top line, their bottom line, and their green line. Because there are companies out there that all have these sustainability initiatives, and they're trying to figure out how to measure their performance against their sustainability goals. And Celonis is going to give them a way to do that. So I'm super excited to be a part of that. And obviously MEDDIC is helping to drive better conversations with customers, value-based conversations with customers that are ultimately driving, these win-win engagements.
It's really interesting because, like, I consider myself a bit of a SaaS historian, right? And before MEDDIC, most of the qualification was early stage qualification. So it was around, like BANT as an example, which I think was born out of, but I think it might have been born out of IBM actually in the 70s. And I think MEDDIC for me was the first time that someone was tackling qualification during the life cycle of the opportunity. So it's not just this early stage thing we do to recognize whether they need to be in pipeline. It's actually, let's continue to ask questions to continue to validate the robustness of the opportunity, which I find really, really interesting, because I think it's where a lot of businesses even today miss a trick, is they're really good at early stage qualification. Is it the right person, right time? Is there a need for our product? But actually, to your point, as the opportunity matures and ripens, more people come into the conversation. Buying is becoming even more complicated, but even more difficult. 11 decision makers being involved in a buying decision in 2021. And it's really interesting that it solved the big problem, particularly in the market. Are you surprised by how MEDDIC itself has evolved? Because I've seen the acronym become even more complex now. It's like MEDDIC with 4 C's plus RR, and it's basically every letter.
I don't know if I've seen that. But, look, I mean, here's the thing. If you go back to the original exercise, why do we win? Why do we lose? And why do deals slip? You can do that exercise. And I would encourage anybody to do that exercise today and bucket your answers. And quite frankly, whatever you come up with is a good thing, right? I don't have a strong affinity for, maybe there's maybe a special place in my heart for the original version, but the reality is, like, whatever you come up with, like, the important thing is that you've, as a leadership team, have agreed that this is the formula that these are the things that we're going to focus on, and these are the things that we're going to accomplish over the course of the process in order for us to win. Now, I think, to your point, early stage qualification, absolutely critical, right? And we actually almost have, we've got sort of a BDR version, right? It's sort of like, well, the BDRs are using their own version, and they're sort of trying to figure out, okay, is this the right fit? Is it a good timing? Are we talking to the right people? Is the problem they're trying to solve one that we can address? Have we worked with other clients like this? Like, those are all great questions to ask early on, right? What's the level of priority and importance of the problem that they're trying to address? And so I think that very beginning qualification and sort of trying to determine whether or not it's the fit, to the solution, and whether or not the things that are sort of unique and different about your solution, whether or not you're going to be able to bring them to bear in this opportunity. And then I think once you get into the deal, like once you're engaged and you're really working at, to me, that's where the kind of the journey, and we really went through a process of actually breaking down the elements of MEDDIC, right? We said, okay, well, what are the things that you have to do to actually secure metrics that the customer will use to justify the investment in our technology? And what are the steps that we go through to identify, engage, and establish alignment with an executive economic buyer who's to be ultimately participating in a decision, in a readout and the decision process, right? So there's going to be like little steps that you're going to go through to actually, sort of achieve your ultimate goal, which is a very robust and integrated answer, a story. Actually, it's a story. You're building a story with MEDDIC, right? That these aren't silos of information. They start out as silos, right? They start out as, okay, I've got a potential champion over here. I've got some requirements over here. I've got a process over here. But eventually it becomes a story that you're building that says, okay, we're identifying a meaningful problem. We're engaging, we're aligned strategically with the senior level leader where there's a business outcome that we can drive for him or her. We're working with trusted people within his or her organization that are going to support our organization. We're navigating through a negotiated process that's going to drive an outcome. We've defined the requirements, and by the way, those requirements we've influenced. We've successfully influenced those requirements such that we have every reason to believe that we're going to win. right? That we've tilted the playing field in our favor because, you know, we're playing to win here, right? And so you've built this story, and to me that's a timeless story, right? If you know, if you were to say, well, gee, do you think this thing's ever going to fizzle out? I don't think so, right? Because that's a story that salespeople will tell forever. It's like, I'm solving a meaningful problem. I have a solution that can impact your business in a meaningful way. I'm aligned with the people that can make this thing happen for your business, and we're aligned with the key executives in the organization, right? To me, that when you're doing those things, when you're doing that's selling. Like when you're, we talk about the difference between activity versus advancement, right? Like sometimes you go to a sales meeting and you're like, did we actually accomplish anything? You know, we were there, we did this thing, we showed the product, but did we actually accomplish anything?
Yeah.
Right? Well, if you can look at the elements of MEDDIC, and you can say, well, we developed our champion today. We influenced the decision criteria. We established and got agreement on a process and next steps. We've identified who the ultimate decision maker is going to be, right? We've identified the metrics that we're going to use to justify our investment, right? Like if you're accomplishing those things in meetings, that's real advancement. And so we actually did that. We looked across all of the elements of MEDDIC, and we broke them down into all sort of smaller pieces.
Yeah.
And then we sort of distributed those pieces across our sales stage. And we looked at each of the sales stages and we said, okay, how do we make sure that this sales stage is a win-win?
Yeah.
Right. And so I'll come back to my other favorite book here, which is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Right. You know, those are timeless principles too. And so one of the 7 habits is think win-win. And so when we think about a sales stage, we think about, okay, well, what are the things that we're going to deliver to the customer that are going to be of value? You know, insights, you know, new ideas about how we can solve problems and impact their business. And then what are the things that we should expect to get in return? Yeah. And so we think about sort of give to get at every stage in the process. That is win-win. And to me, that's where I think the beauty of it is that, to me, this doesn't feel deceptive. This doesn't feel like we're doing something that is not transparent. You know, we live in an age now of transparency, and, you know, clients don't want to feel like they're being, you know, sold to. They want to navigate through a win-win or, you know, value-based process. And I think when we set it up like that, you know, that's what it feels like. It feels like, you know, we're agreeing to move forward together with the prospect. And, you know, these are each sort of little toll gates where we get to make a decision. Should we keep going?
I'm really glad you brought that context up, actually, because I think a couple of things jump out to me when I hear about businesses implementing MEDDIC is that they think it's a silver bullet, right? So you just put these 6 letters in your CRM, and then good news, you're now going to be a, you know, 10x company than you were last year. It's like, well, no, actually, there's a great deal of nuance to each of those letters, and there's a great deal of activities and tasks and hearts and minds that you need to win along the way. And also, you know, you've got to build the credibility and earn the right to ask questions around some of those things that you're talking about there as well. The reason I bring that up is because I think sales is the confluence of science and art, right? It's the science of doing the right things that are customer focused and all of the kind of inputs that go into that. But also being able to do it in a way that builds trust, builds credibility, helps rapport flourish as well. And MEDDIC enables that. It enables the framework of the conversation and the boundaries of the conversation. It also creates focus in the salesperson, which is really important. But actually, it's just a coat hanger to hang your coat on. It doesn't mean it quells your personality. We all have a unique way of the way that we find this information out and we gather the key.
That's right.
But I guess it kind of brings up an obvious question, right? And I know you've not been directly involved with the different integrations of MEDDIC across different organizations, although I'm sure you play some part in it now at the business that you're at, and obviously you're advising still for Sprinkler, from what I understand. So what are the kind of bugbears that you see with implementation of MEDDIC where either people aren't getting it or they're not fully understanding the potential of what the qualification framework can actually do?
Yeah, great question. So I think that people need to keep in mind that, like you said, it's not a silver bullet. It is a part of the framework that you have to build, which really defines the what. what are the things that we have to accomplish over the course of the sales process? And at the end, a good way to think about this is, and I think I got this from Jack, was, there are many organizations that have come up with a very simple scoring methodology. And basically it's 0, 1, or 2. And so for each of the elements, you can kind of say, okay, 0 is no way, 1 is one way, and 2 is two way, meaning bi-directional, right? So what an example of that, like, so sort of trying to think about where are you ultimately trying to get to, right? Because there are some people who I think very naively say, well, MEDDIC is just a checkbox. It's just like, okay, well, do I have it or don't I have it, right? But to your point, right, it's a journey. It's something that's built out, and it is ultimately a very robust thing that becomes a story, like I described earlier. And so that two-way, means that we agree that this is the problem we're solving. We agree that this is how we're going to measure success. We agree that this is the decision criteria, and we agree that this is the sequence of events that we're going to go through, right? That we've negotiated. There are things that you need. There are things that we need, right? We're going to navigate through this process together. And so ultimately you get to this sequence of events that ultimately leads to a decision. And so so once you understand that, then I think you can layer on top of it kind of the how, right? Like what's the strategy? What are the nuances of our industry or our business? How complex is our sales process? What's the pre-sales support? The other thing to think about is that MEDDIC was born in an environment of disruptive technology. Okay. And so when you're selling, and this was PTC, right? It was the world's first 3D CAD CAM solution. And so we were selling to people who were still doing 2D drafting, right? It was like showing fire to the cavemen. And so when you have a disruptive solution, right, you actually don't care about the budget, right? Because people are like, well, do you have a budget? A budget for what? Right? And so it's like if they have a budget for something, it's probably, you're actually too late, right? What we're selling at Celonis is actually a strategic investment. And that's why it's so important for us to be able to get to executives, is because executives are the ones that have the ability to have the ability to move money. Right? They've got discretionary access to funds, or they've got pools of funds that they can invest in to do things like digital transformation. So for that reason, getting to the senior level execs is critical. But when you start thinking about sort of the how to, when I was at PTC, we were all reading this book called Selling the Veto, right? It was all about Veto being the very important top officer, right? So it was like techniques on how to get to a senior level executive. And today I've got sitting right here, The Challenger Sale, a great book, great principles on sort of how to reframe the problem and gain control of a process, right? And so those are all great techniques and things that are completely complementary, right, to MEDDIC. And so I think where people fall short, back to your original question, I think is maybe when they do think of it as a silver bullet, when they don't think of it in terms of a process, and they don't really have a clear vision as to where they're trying to get to at the end of a sales cycle. Like what does great outcome look like? What are all the things that we've fully accomplished? And then you get to a point where the customer says, we want, you guys have clearly established yourselves as our vendor of choice. We want to do business. That's the outcome that we get to. And then we get to negotiation, where we're doing statements of work and all that fun stuff. But I think that's where people come up short is I think, when they think of it too simplistically, and they don't think of it as, a journey, and they don't think of it in terms of how do we complement this with a strategy like Challenger or other methods that really help you to solve the question of sort of not just what do we need to accomplish, but how how are we going to navigate our way through the process?
That's the key point for me. And I think you've hit on something really interesting. And I think it's the conflation that businesses often make between qualification methodology, sales process, and sales methodology, right? And I like to use the analogy of baking a cake, right? Like the qualification methodology is literally, it's the list of ingredients. Here's all the things you need. If you don't have this stuff, you don't have a cake, right? Then you've got the instructions, which is, this is how you bake the cake. Well, that's your sales process. Here's the steps that you need to take to bake the cake. And then lastly, like the challenger sale is like, well, how do you whisk the eggs so you've got fluffy peaks? How do you like sift the flour so it doesn't like clang? Well, that's the sales methodology. That's the how you do it, like the skill that's associated.
That's right.
When you bring all three of those things together, you actually have like, you have the perfect way your organization can sell. But they don't. They turn around and go, we just need a qualification methodology. And they expect MEDDIC to be a sales process. It's not a sales process. You still have to take control of how you do it and the steps that are associated with it. It's really interesting here you make the distinction as well. And also, like, what I've found over the years is that this is inextricably linked to forecasting. So if you get these parts right, you start building a predictable business, and then you can just link it to your forecast categories and you become predictable. And salespeople have control of their pipeline as well. What's interesting, I like to ask, and I've asked this to Professor Rackham, and I've asked this actually to Matt and Brent, who wrote the Challenger Sale, and I'm keen to get your perspective on this, is that selling is a game of cat and mouse, where we come up with something new and buyers respond to it because it's novel. And they say, this is really interesting. I've never been sold to like this before. This is a really valuable process. Over time, the market gets flooded with this way of selling. And then we create fatigue in the buyer, where you're doing the same thing. I get you're doing the challenger sale on me. You're teaching Taylor and taking control. Or I get you're using spin selling on me. Do you think customers ever come wise to when they're being run through a MEDDIC process? Or do you think is there a danger that we can create that fatigue with customers as well?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because I think that let's look at it. Let's look at it from the customer's perspective. What does MEDDIC represent to the customer? Well, the I means that I have a vendor that's approaching me, that's offering to solve a problem that's meaningful to my business. The M, they're talking about a KPI that's meaningful to me and my business and my boss. And they're saying that they have the potential to actually move the needle on a KPI that would actually drive a positive outcome for our business. So that's interesting. They want to navigate through a process where we'll get educated, where we'll involve the right people, we'll have the right stakeholders, we'll get to a consensus decision because we get agreement around the decision criteria, and that we've got people involved that want this thing to happen. Like, what's not to like about that? I could walk a procurement person. I could walk a procurement person through that, and I would say, hey, Mr. Procurement guy, or Ms. Procurement lady, does that sound okay to you? Would you like us to engage in a process where we do these things? And I guarantee they would say, that would be excellent. If we could, that would be a great outcome, right? The other, if you look at the decision criteria and decision process, it's funny. One of the things that we sort of said tongue in cheek to our customers is, do you want this process to be pleasurable or painful? Right? It's like, to your point, how do you get 6 or 8 or 10 people to agree on anything?
Yeah.
Right. And so what we're saying to you is, we're offering you, whether we end up doing business together or you end up going a different direction, our goal here is to help you come to a consensus decision. And the way to do that is to clearly define the decision criteria, and then for you to navigate through a sequence of events that help you to come to a definitive decision as to which one of the vendors or which one of the choices best fulfills those requirements.
Yeah.
And if we look at the decision criteria and we decide to compete, it's because we think we can win, right? And any other vendor would say the same thing.
I agree with you. In fact, I'd actually argue that MEDDIC is actually and will become more important with the way the trend is moving in the market. I think it's probably more valuable now than it was 26 years ago, for a couple of reasons. I think business departments are becoming more siloed, despite the fact they've got more technology to bring them together. They're finding it difficult to discern the white noise from the signals of interdepartmental conversation and communication. More people are getting involved in buying decisions. 53% of opportunities are ending in no decision. And on top of that, I think ultimately the sales experience now and the role of the salesperson is a lot more about curating information and creating the environment to buy, and much less about selling. And I think more valuable now than it's ever been, would be my perspective.
And I think you make a very good point here. And I'll come back to what you said about no decision, right? That most decisions, right, end up, or many decisions end up in no decision. And so I think one of the things that many sellers really struggle with is how to qualify out, how and when to qualify out. And so, that's really one of the things that we've worked on, is because we have very, very clearly defined sales stages, right? We've got pain discovery and pain confirmed, which is kind of a scoping stage. And then we get into executive alignment, and then we get into proof, and then negotiate, right? It's like, those are steps that are actually outlined, almost exactly describe what John McMahon outlined in The Qualified Sales Leader. Very, very common. And the problem that a lot of reps have is that they want to keep going, because they think if they can keep going through the process that something magical will happen. But what we found is that we refer to it as disciplined execution. And disciplined execution means that if there are 6 or 8 things that you need to accomplish during a sales stage, then you shouldn't advance to the next sales stage until you thoroughly execute those things. Because these are the little things that you do early on that are going to lead to, ultimately engaging with an executive, or ultimately lead to, being able to influence the decision criteria. If you're not able to, in our business, if we can't negotiate and conduct a discovery workshop with the appropriate stakeholders to develop a hypothesis about how we believe we can help the client, if that doesn't happen, then our chances of winning drop dramatically, right? And so we've really tried to instill this principle of disciplined execution, and we've found that it is true that if you thoroughly execute a stage, the likelihood of you thoroughly executing the subsequent stage goes way up.
Yeah.
And if you cut corners early, then that incompleteness, that inefficiency, that sloppiness, may I say, is going to perpetuate.
Yeah.
And you're going to get to the end of a process, and there's not going to be a decision, because you didn't get consensus, you didn't influence the decision criteria, you didn't negotiate a process, you didn't develop a champion, and so small mistakes early will manifest themselves later in the process. And so this philosophy of disciplined execution, I think, is a good one, and it's helping our reps to qualify out.
Yeah.
Which means that which isn't to say that they're never going to talk to those clients again. It just means that they're going to get deprioritized.
Yeah,
exactly. It means maybe the timing isn't right, and so you back burner something, and you maybe you're not as responsive, or maybe you're not, you're finding a way to sort of push back and say no, and then maybe a quarter later, maybe the client comes back and says, hey, hey, Aaron, I know we sort of came to an impasse last quarter, but guess what? We've gotten our act together, and we're ready to do the thing that you wanted us to do.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Because again, like what you're describing is 2 things. Number one is removing subjectivity from the deal. Like you want to stay objective, because it's hard in selling, right? Because you tell yourself stories and you pick up signals that aren't really there. But if the criteria is as objective as possible, it becomes,
that's right,
just like, well, have you done it or have you not done it? Has the customer agreed to it or have they not agreed to it? So
that's right.
And they can tell you about how much you've spent time with them and they like you and they told you about their kids, but that's just a story. Have they done it or have they not done it?
That's right.
The other thing is the circumstantial subjectivity as well. Like if you're at the end of the month and you're convincing yourself that these things are going to come in because of the pressure of the target, because of the pressure of the timeline, you see these happy ears and this rose-tinted glasses actually increase. As the pressure increases, the more we convince ourselves that this is a done deal. So what I love about MEDDIC done properly is that it actually completely removes subjectivity, which then has another effect between the relationship of the manager and the rep, because the conversations have become shorter and more effective when talking about deals, talking about pipeline.
That's right. And, it's I think to that point, one of the things that we've really seen here is that the quality or the efficiency of our deal reviews has gone way up, right? And so, we may be talking to a sales rep who says they've got an opportunity in executive alignment, and I'll say, okay, that's great. Before we talk about that, let's take a look at where you came from. Let's take a look at the previous sales stage, right? Let's see how thoroughly, were there any gaps? Was there anything that was missed in the previous stage? And now, okay, now take me forward to where we are now. Sales reps are great storytellers, right? But when you take this approach, it dramatically reduces the storytelling and really gets to the heart of the issues and the things that either have or haven't happened. The other thing I'll say about this is that the other benefit we've seen from this is that it actually is helping reps to identify reps and their managers to identify maybe some soft spots in the rep skill set, so that it's like one of the things that we have to do in our process is we've got to uncover the partner landscape. So we actually use MEDDIC, and at Celonis, the P stands for partner plan, because we have to make sure that we involve the partners, because the partners can really add value. We're working with Accenture and Deloitte and E&Y and all these great, business consulting firms who can actually add value. As we think about sort of the soft spots in the sales reps skill set, you may find that maybe a rep is struggling with asking the right questions to uncover the partner landscape, or they may struggle with the questions to, help the customer, understand why it's important that executive involvement is going to be necessary, in this process. And so when reps and managers can have a discussion about the things that haven't gotten accomplished, those are perfect developmental opportunities, right? And now you're addressing sort of a soft spot in a rep, and the rep can get better, right? Now you've taught them to overcome that objection. You've taught them to improve the positioning of the process. And now a rep is performing, the next time they encounter that situation, they can now address that item. They can, every time you check one of those boxes, you're actually removing risk from the opportunity. And so that's the benefit. And it's one of the real positive outcomes that we've seen from the disciplined execution approach that I was describing.
Well, it can also become an organizational capability as well, right? Because if you could start trending across the whole pipeline about where the organization is weak across MEDDIC or across whatever the qualification methodology is you're using, then you can deploy your enablement function or deploy your training in those areas. And you just got an instant solution to what could be unlocking so much pipeline and so much influence on the pipeline as well.
It's great comment, and absolutely true. And so, we're collecting that data now, and we're able to identify where not only where some teams may be struggling, but also identifying teams, because all of those items that we accomplish over the course of our sales journey are actually associated with an element of MEDDIC, right? So you can sort of behind the scenes. So I think the way that we've implemented it is I would describe our implementation as MEDDIC is the operating system, not the application, right? And so because of that, now there's data behind the user interface that says, hey, Aaron's team is absolutely kicking ass on developing champions, but Dick's team is struggling in that area. So what's Aaron doing that Dick's not doing? Those kinds of insights are absolutely out there, and you'll find that different teams have different strengths.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and Dick, like I could sit here chatting to you about this all day long, but unfortunately we don't have time to do it. So for anyone that wants to get in touch with you or learn more about your organization or some of the work you've done, what's the best way of people getting in contact with you or seeing some of the work that you've done?
Yeah, check me out on on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect with with sales leaders and sales enablement leaders. I do have a day job, but I do also happy to just have conversations, maybe offer some coaching. So and maybe someday I'll hang out my own shingle. But for now, very excited to help Celonis achieve sort of our mission. But no, it's been a pleasure.
And where's the best place for people to learn more about Celonis?
Yeah, you can go to celonis.com and CELONIS, and we are getting ready to launch our major annual our user group conference, which is going to be held in Germany this year. It's the world's best users of people who are leveraging our technology to drive business process improvement, to drive business outcomes for clients. And so we're excited for that. And we recently completed a world tour. So we went all around the world and did live events. It was great to be in person again with our customers and prospective clients all over the world. Traveled around Europe and America, so we'll do that as an annual event. And so maybe you'll be able to catch one next year.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure all the links to that are in the description of this video. And lastly, I just want to take the time for thanking you for obviously coming up with a wonderful methodology that is MEDDIC, and obviously thank you for giving the time today to have a conversation with me.
Yeah, my pleasure, Aaron, and all the best to you.